may be seated. If you are not here, he is risen.
He is risen indeed.
Yes, he is. Welcome back to Momentum, this wonderful late, early Easter, right? Easter is so early this year. It's only April 5th, and it is Easter. It just kind of came up upon us, didn't it? You have probably been doing very traditional Easter things leading up. I don't know, maybe you had like some sort of Lenten fast that you dedicated yourself to. Maybe today you're hiding Easter eggs for a grandchild or someone, or having relatives over. This spring season has not been terribly Eastery for me. I did this. That's right. I went to a comic book convention. This is not the biggie. The biggie's down in San Diego. That's Comic-Con San Diego, right? And then we have this other secondary one in Los Angeles called the LA Comic-Con. This is the very tame suburban Anaheim Comic Convention, also known as WonderCon. So I think this is going to be my yearly tradition now. I went this year. I was like, oh, I'm going to come back every single year to this convention. This convention is super tame, very suburban. It's just the right niche for me. But it has all of those things that a normal traditional comic book convention has. It has booths that buy and sell vintage comic books, and there are breakout sessions where they tell you about new movies that are coming up. And then, of course, they have opportunities to get autograph. You know this, right? When you go and you get an autograph from a star now, TV star or movie star, they charge you like $40 for a signature. Wow. That's how they make money now. Yeah. They're just lining up $40 at a time, and you might get a picture, or you get an autograph, $40, $50. Some people charge like $125 just to sign their John Hancock for you. And it's successful, people do it. But of course, like every convention, people also dress up. If you're not hip with the lingo, it's called cosplay, right? Cosplay, that's what they do. If you go to a convention for the very first time, this is very surprising. Because you see pictures like this, you see them in the TV, all that kind of stuff. But when you get there, what is jarring is the amount of people who are dressed up. You go to Anaheim, and this is a tame, very tame suburban. I would say 50% of the people there were dressed up as some sort of, there were Spider-Men, there were Supermen, there were Green Lanterns and X-Men and anime characters. You can spend the whole day just sitting, enjoying your time, and trying to identify it's like Halloween, and what are you today? But you identify all the different people in popular culture that are being dressed up as. So, what that does naturally though, is if you're with a friend or maybe even having an internal conversation with yourself, it spurs this conversation of, well, if I were to do that, who would I dress up as?
Yeah.
And all these little pictures go off in your head. And I've given it a lot of thought. I have thought about this question for probably more deeply than it deserves. And I have come to this conclusion. If I were to dress up and do cosplay, I would dress up as no one. Like, I would just never, ever, ever do this. Just take, it's a big plunge, right? You gotta either buy, you're gonna make something. Why would I never, ever consider doing this? Well, take a look at this. This is Chris Evans, right? As Captain America. This is your normal person who dresses up as Captain America when you go to one. Seriously, I see people like this all the time. This is Chris Hemsworth as Thor from the movies, right? It's a good costume, but it's not just a costume. This is some dude like dress up. This is, your garden variety. I dress up for the convention. The truth is this. Dressing up often is a reminder. The actors who play these characters are I mean, sure, that's a great costume and everything. It's more than a costume, though. These people are specimens of humanity. Like, they are rippling. They look awesome. Simultaneously, dressing up highlights just how much we are not Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah.
These kind of people are cast into their roles as these characters for a good reason. And we sit in the theater comfortably watching these kinds of people for an equally good reason. We are not up there on the screen because we're no Chris Hemsworths, right? This Easter morning, as we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, we're going to study a history of Jesus coming back to life, the resurrection, right? That is more obscure than most of the accounts that we've heard about, a little less known narrative, but addresses this very theme. That God invites us into the experience of the resurrection. And Jesus, obviously, is the star of Easter, of rising from the dead and coming from the grave. But God reaches out to us and includes us as well. Speaks to us, he involves us, whoever we might be, as ordinary and as unremarkable as each of us might be. Jesus still reaches and teaches and reveals himself and sends us as a result of his coming back to life. So let's go to our passage this morning. It's found in the book of Luke, Luke chapter 24, verses 13 through 35. Luke 24, 13 through 35, of course. If you've got your Bibles, you can open there, your Bible app. But as we always do, we printed in your bulletin for you. You can open that or just follow up here on the screen. You will observe when you open your bulletin, though, and you see that, it is a super long passage. So as we do when we have a longer passage, I'm going to break it up into 3 little segments, little vignettes for us to study at a time. So the first is verses 13 through 24. Again, this is Luke recounting the events that have happened just after the resurrection. Luke writes this. He says, "And behold, 2 of them were going that very day to a village named Emmaus, which was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about all these things which had taken place. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself approached and began traveling with them. But their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. And he said to them, 'What are these words that you are exchanging with one another as you are walking?' And they stood still, looking sad. One of them, named Cleopas, answered and said to him, 'Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem and unaware of the things which have happened here in these days?' And he said to them, 'What things?' And they said to him, 'The things about Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word in the sight of God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to the sentence of death and crucified him. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, it's the 3rd day since these things happened. But also, some women among us amazed us when they were at the tomb early in the morning and didn't find his body. They came saying that they had also seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it exactly as the woman also had said, but him they didn't see.'" Okay, this account, very unique. It's called a lot of people call it the Road to Emmaus encounter, or just the Road to Emmaus. But it's unique to the book of Luke. None of the other 3 biographers of Jesus ever mention this. And we're going to see why exactly Luke does, while those do not. And so, as we do, let's zoom out and take a look at how we got to this series of verses by looking at the context of Luke chapter 24. Now, if you've been with us, you know that we have been studying another gospel, the book of John, which is a biography of Jesus as well. John's got a very particular theme to his whole biography of Jesus, right? Just like John, Luke also has a very particular theme to his biography of Jesus. The very big theme of Luke can be summed up in one word: fulfillment. Fulfillment. Jesus is the fulfillment. Now, Jesus is the fulfillment of all the prophecies, all the plans, all the premeditations of God. This is why, even though the main audience of this book, not primarily a Jewish audience, well, even though it's not primarily a Jewish audience, Luke quotes a whole bunch of the Old Testament because he's showing that Jesus is the fulfillment of everything in the Old Testament and all of the plans that God has had up into history until now and what he wants to do in the world. And this is why Jesus also, he begins his public ministry in Luke chapter 4. Some of his first words out of his mouth are this: today, the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. What's Jesus saying? He's saying he is the fulfillment of all of the plans that God has been telling people up until that time. A big part of that fulfillment and that theme is that God's fulfilling his plans, but they're not what we expect them to be. They're nothing like we expect. Instead of Jesus being born into a wealthy and well-positioned family, like Zacharias and Elizabeth, we learn about them in chapter 1, and we're like, oh, the Savior must come from these very well-positioned, very wealthy people, this high priest. No, Jesus is born instead to a poor and unwed couple, Mary and Joseph. Instead of liberating God's people, currying favor with the existing Jewish leadership, Jesus absolutely antagonizes all of the people that are in power at the time, who he should be making friends with. Instead of convincing the everyday Israelite that, oh, look at me, I'm your king. No, Jesus goes to the weirdos, right? Jesus goes to the lepers. He ministers to the prostitutes. He forgives people who are betrayers of the nation of Israel, right? It's people like the tax collectors, right? But this is how the fulfillment that God is talking about is coming to the world, is being carried out. Jesus is fulfilling God's heart by coming to the downtrodden and to the unnoticed. The ultimate counterintuitive fulfillment of God's plan is this: Jesus finally delivers himself to betrayal. He walks right into this situation where he's captured, he's unjustly tried, he's tortured, all of his followers abandon him, and he's eventually crucified. He's killed by being nailed by his hands and his feet to a cross. Jesus fulfills God's greatest and most unexpected plan by serving as a sacrifice. All that we owe to God, all of our rebellious nature, all the guilt that we carry with us, all the ways that we've betrayed others and hurt God, Jesus is punished in our place so that God now looks on us and we can start a whole new slate. Jesus switches places with us, takes the punishment that we deserve, and then he gives to us a new life. That's the book of Luke in a nutshell, that one theme, fulfillment. And now we're simply at the amazing conclusion of all of that. Jesus has been crucified. Jesus has risen from the dead. He is no longer in the grave. And so far, who has seen Jesus after his resurrection? Nobody. Nobody. Up until this point, 0 people have seen Jesus after his resurrection. A few women, like our passage has said, have gone to the tomb, they found it empty, and an angel told them, that Jesus is alive, but so far not one person has witnessed personally Jesus being raised from the dead. The snapshot that we're in right now is that very first appearance, the first sighting of Jesus. And we're going to title it this, The Strange Encounter. Because it's super weird. It is a very strange encounter. First, we're introduced to these two guys. There's just a couple of guys, right? They're walking their path. There's nothing remarkable about these two, right? We've heard of them. We've never heard of them before. There's 24 chapters of this book. These are new people altogether. We aren't told anything about these two people. There's no profession, no age, there's no description, like there's a tall one, there's a short one, there's a big one, there's a small one. They're just two people walking along. And all we know is they're traveling to a village called Emmaus. And even then, we're only told that because we need an excuse to know why they're on a path walking from one place to another. And verse 13 just says this: 2 of them were going that very day to a village named Emmaus, which was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And one of these guys, terrible, right? We're not even told his name. Just think You're in the Bible for 22 verses, and they don't even mention your name. Like I could be immortalized for the rest of eternity, but no one seemed to care enough to put. The other guy is named Cleopas, and we're not introduced to this guy until verse 18 anyway. Probably mention his name because there might be some people extant who are living at the time who know Cleopas like personally, and it validates this testimony. But besides that, like it doesn't seem like they're making a big deal about these two, right? So basically, that's 2/3 of the cast of characters. Just two people traveling on a road. And then Luke completes the scene. The resurrected Jesus kind of sidles up alongside of them, starts to walk with them. Now, even though these two know Jesus enough that they ought to recognize Jesus, the Bible says, their eyes are prevented from recognizing Jesus. Kind of, you gotta get the sense that this is supernatural obscuring, that Jesus, right, he doesn't got some COVID mask on, or he's not using a funny voice. He's supernaturally a little bit obscured from their sight. But Jesus comes up to these guys, and they happen to be talking about everything that just happened to Jesus. Most likely, his entrance into Jerusalem, his betrayal, his fake trial, his torture, the mockery of the soldiers, and finally, his tragic demise. Cruel death. And the picture, thinking about it, is pretty ridiculous. Because Jesus asked them, hey, so what are you talking about? What are you talking about? And that's why we call this the strange encounter. Because Cleopas basically condescends to the hidden Jesus, saying, are you the only person who hasn't heard of all of what happened to Jesus? And so, right, these two travelers feel like they gotta tell Jesus about what has just happened to Jesus.
Good.
And we had all our hopes pinned on this Jesus guy. But now, they say Jesus is dead. Some of the women said that the tomb of Jesus is empty, and they end their story with kind of a note of doubt. Right? There's people who went to the tomb because the women said that it was empty, but it's not like anybody saw the risen Jesus. The Bible says, some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just exactly as the woman also had said, but him they did not see. So they said something, but we didn't see it. Nobody saw it. And that's the strange encounter. Just two random people walking along who have to explain to the risen Jesus all about Jesus. But they really hope that this Jesus guy would have been a great savior. But he's dead, his body's gone, and that's that. I've commented before, we've kind of looked at this passage before at one point or another. I've commented, this is like the worst episode of Undercover Boss ever. Like, we're going to get to that point where they recognize him, right? And like, you're fired. No. But this is the snapshot of the strange encounter, which is then followed by our next scene, which is Luke 24 through 27, which is much shorter. Okay, it's just a few verses. And Luke writes this, and he said to them, O foolish men, and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and to enter into his glory? Then, beginning with Moses and with all the prophets, he explained to them the things concerning himself in all the scriptures. So Jesus has been on the receiving end up till this point in time, right? He's listening to them. They're explaining to him, all about Jesus. And now Jesus answers back finally. And we'll call this section the big picture. The big picture. Because it's, even though it's only 3 verses, Jesus really letting it out, right? The big picture is that Jesus responds to these two traveling companions, and in response to their description and to their doubts, he explains, you've had the wrong picture of the plan of God. And that's why you don't understand anything. He said, verse 26, was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things to enter into his glory? He's got to explain that what happened to Jesus, him, was all part of the plan. But you can't see that plan because you wanted a different plan. In the theme of fulfillment, Jesus is fulfilling God's plan, sacrificing himself to take away our punishment and our guilt. But they didn't see that because they wanted their plan to be fulfilled. They wanted Jesus to be a general who marshaled an army, who trained people to handle weapons, who took them to war against Rome and the terrible oppressors and the pagans and the terrible people who are over them, right? Instead, they got a guy who got caught. They got a guy who didn't defend himself vigorously in the courts, who lost the confidence of the people and then died. Jesus comes out and he says it. He says, you missed it. You missed the fulfillment that God was bringing. The fulfillment that God was bringing is all about the fact that God has been telling you for centuries, you're slow of heart to believe in all the prophets and what they've said to you, right? Well, that's like the last passage, right? Foolish men slow of heart. That's the central theme. God's plan is being fulfilled in the suffering of Jesus. If you know that the suffering of Jesus is what Jesus is supposed to be doing and not conquest, losing instead of winning, well, then everything else makes sense. Everything happened the way it was supposed to happen. So first snapshot is the strange encounter. The second is this big picture from Jesus. So let's go to our last vignette that Luke paints for us, and it's Luke 24, 28 through 35 up here. Last 8 verses. Luke concludes, and he writes this. He says, "And they approached the village where they were going, and he acted as though he were going farther. But they urged him, saying, 'Stay with us, for it's getting toward evening, and the day is now nearly over.' So he went in to stay with them. When he had reclined at the table with them, he took the bread and blessed it, and breaking it, he began giving it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to one another, 'Were not our hearts burning within us while he was speaking to us on the road, while he was explaining the scriptures to us?' And they got up that very hour and returned to Jerusalem and found gathered together the 11 and those who were with them, saying, 'The Lord has really risen and has appeared to Simon.' They began to relate their experiences on the road and how he was recognized by them in the breaking of the bread." So our last snapshot is it's the climax. Everything comes together, right? Which we're going to call the amazing reveal. It's like right when Undercover Boss ends. And this is where the bonkers narrative, it just gets more bonkers. Undercover Jesus. He's with Cleopas and his friend, and these two pilgrims urge Jesus to stay with them in Emmaus, right? It's getting late, so why don't you, take a rest, stay with us, for it's getting toward evening, and the day is now nearly over. They say, so Jesus, he does. He stops in Emmaus with them. And even though Jesus has explained everything about Jesus to them, they still don't know it's Jesus. So they settle in restaurant. Maybe they brought some food with them and they're sharing it together, but they sit down for a meal and it's time to eat the bread. And Jesus prays and he starts doling out the bread, just like he did before he died. Now these two, Cleopas and his friend, most likely were not in the room among the followers of Jesus before his death when he instituted this kind of Passover meal thing, this Last Supper, which is now, communion for us and right, the Lord's Supper. But, and explaining his body being bread and his blood being wine. But God knows the theming of all of this and that it will be important for readers in the future when we read this. So just at this meal, something clicks in the minds and the hearts of these friends. And, Neo, like the red pill, blue pill, right? Their eyes, boosh, are opened. The Bible says, right? They recognized Jesus. But once they do, like right that moment, poof, he vanishes. Gone. And that's that. That's like we saw the risen Jesus just for a moment, and then he was gone. And that's their story, really, of their belief. Right? They turn to each other then and say, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was speaking to us on the road, while he was explaining the scriptures to us?" And even though it's late, right? It's evening time. They're eating dinner. Right? They know this has got to be our mission. They abandoned their plans to stay in Emmaus, And through the middle of the night, they rush back to Jerusalem. Remember, it's a 7-mile walk or run. It's a long way. So they're leaving in the evening, and these unremarkable, non-main characters, they gather with the main cast of characters, right? The 11 disciples of Jesus, and they affirm the Lord has really risen. But this is why. This is why God chooses these two. Random couple of nobodies. Not the disciples, not the women who were close to Jesus throughout his ministry. These two make the cut. Why? Precisely because they're so unremarkable. Because they're us. They're our proxies. Not particularly special, not the stars of the show. They're slow of heart. They definitely are not particularly insightful. Jesus is right in front of them. Their eyes don't recognize Jesus for who he is. But once Jesus drills it into their and our minds and hearts of who he is, it spurs them, hey, we got to tell people about Jesus. And that he is risen. He's risen indeed. He's the one who dies the death we ought to have died. He is the one who then frees us. This is the road to Emmaus. It tells us the resurrection comes to us. It impacts us. It's Jesus showing himself to people like us. And it moves us to declare the power and the reality and the purpose of Jesus. That makes the application of this passage pretty easy, simple, and that is this. Jesus uses the most unremarkable of us. The unremarkable. That whoever we might be, we don't have to be main character energy. We don't have to be specimens of greatness and education or togetherness or social graces. This is the whole point of this whole interlude. Luke includes it because Luke wants us to see the grand scheme of God's plan, the chosenness of the people that God uses, goes way beyond what we think. He reaches to the unexpected people, the ignored people, the nameless people. I still keep thinking about this guy. I was there for 22 verses and they did not mention my name, right? The nameless people, the ordinary people. All of us reading this account, all of the super hero-y type of people. Just like Jesus chooses to reveal himself, first of all, not to one of the main characters, like to Mary or to Peter, or goes up on top of a mountain and glows at everything. No, the first amazing post-resurrection appearance, two obscure people. Walking from one place to another, neither with great insight into God's plan, dejected like everybody else, so clueless that they're explaining Jesus to Jesus. Nobody gets more ordinary, I'm sorry, than these two schmucks, right? Just a couple of schlubs that are walking along the road. And so in the same way, Jesus reveals himself to me and you, all of us. We don't have to be special. If you've not gone to church all your life, you come to church every week. If you're firstborn, you're lastborn, you're middleborn, you're second of five, or whatever you might have been born. Sure, the Bible is filled with very remarkable people. There's miracle workers and warriors, and there's musicians, and there's people who wash, ladies who wash the feet of Jesus, and men who, take up the sword for God. But, they're people who never get their names mentioned either. If we don't identify with the big names and the overachievers, Jesus appears to the most ordinary. He reveals himself to them, and he cares for them, like he reveals himself to us. The lesson of the story is that Jesus wants to enter your life and my life. He wants us to know who he is and to use us to tell others about him. God, who lived 2,000 years ago. God, who lived among us and loved us and taught us, but most of all did not overpower and conquer everyone and the world, but instead died for us, so that all the debts that we owe, all the crimes that we commit against God, would be paid for by the death of his son, Jesus. So that God so loves the world that he comes and he gives his life so that we would be declared innocent and we would be given a new life, be loved by him. That's the message of Easter. Jesus came, Jesus died, rose again from the dead, proving God's love and his power to raise us from the dead as well. But that message, it comes to everybody, all of us. And then we, like these Emmaus people, this duo to Emmaus, we're so astounded by Jesus, we run to others and we tell them the great news of the risen Jesus. I mentioned this before, that this is my new office. This is, in fact, the very perspective. I found this picture online, but this is, in fact, the very perspective that I see whenever I go to Panera, because this is from the very seat that I sit at Panera Bread. So this is like at the very entrance. This is where all the outlets are, so I can spend like a good deal of my day there. Now, I told you that I'm here 3-4 days out of the week in the mornings because I'm part of what they call the Unlimited Sip Club. Flat fee. You can get as much coffee, tea, soda, lemonade that you like. And for me, that's only $4 a month because I got a coupon. Anyway, so that means that practically they have your phone number on file. You go to the counter, you ask for a unlimited sip cup, and they ask you, oh, do you want a hot cup or you want a cold cup? And you tell them, and then they ask you your phone number. You give them your phone number, and they input it into the system because you're only allowed one new cup every 2 hours, right? They don't want you like overwhelming their inventory of cups. So a couple of weeks ago, I'm in my routine. Go to Panera in the morning, go to the counter, get my cup from the counter, and the lady asked me, actually, yeah, it was a lady this time. It was not. So there's this guy who knows all of our names, but it wasn't that guy that morning. So it's this lady. And she types in, she said, oh, so what's your phone number? I said, 310, blah, 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 blah. And she types it in. And so I take my Sip Club cup, and I go towards the drink, and she says, have a good morning, Chris. Oh, no. Not Chris. Byron. Because your name comes up on the screen, and that's how they know everybody's name. They start to learn your name after that. I'm like, oh, no, that's not Chris. And so, she's like, what's your phone number? And so I get it's 311, blah, blah, blah. And then she inputs it again. You know what? I was off. I transposed one number. One of your 4s for a 6. One of your 6s for a 4. So I was just one number off, and I got Chris's account coming up. And that's just struck me. Well, at first it struck me that there's only one difference, like one number difference between my phone number and somebody else who was a Sip Cup Club member. The second realization, because I grew up in a criminal household, basically, was, I could just cancel my subscription and I could be Chris from here on out. I would have to reply to the name Chris from now on, but I could do it. Then I'm like, oh no, but I'm a believer in Jesus. Okay, but right, our whole world nowadays seems geared to remind us that but for one digit, you're just like anybody else. You are somebody else if you remove that digit. You're Chris suddenly, right? It just speaks of our smallness and unremarkableness and ordinary rightness, that you're just a 9-digit social security number to the government. You're an 8-digit driver's license number. You're like, a student ID, or if you're employed, you're a badge number to your company. That's all you are. Replaceable. You're just unremarkable, like we all are. We are one of the billions of unseen, interchangeably, easily replaced people. But this is the message of the Emmaus Road. Whoever we might be, and whatever might be going on in our lives, as generic and ordinary we might think that we might be, it doesn't matter who we are and who we aren't. Jesus, actively caring for us and showing us more of who he is, has nothing to do with who we are. It has everything to do with who he is as a loving God. As someone who sees us and reveals himself to us and loves us and uses us to do the most important thing anyone in history can possibly do, and that is tell others about him. In that, we all live the most extraordinary lives ever. Again, not because of this, not because of who we are, but because of what Jesus does in our lives by rescuing us, revealing himself to us and motivating us with his love. So, application number 1, Jesus uses the other mark. Hey, look, I already got application number 2 up. And that is see Jesus through the lens of sacrifice. That's how we see who Jesus is. This is the big supernatural lesson of the passage, that these friends, they spend a lot of time. They spent a lot of time, like miles of time, walking with Jesus. They got no clue about who Jesus is.
Yeah.
They don't see him for who he is. And they miss the impact of who Jesus is. He is instead a topic of conversation rather than a relationship with him. Until Jesus breaks the bread. And that's the teachable moment. That's what Luke is conveying. Luke is reminding us that Jesus had told his followers, remember the breaking of the bread. When you are breaking bread, it's like you're breaking his body, right? Remember the giving of his blood when you take of the cup. And so that when these followers' eyes are open to who Jesus is for the very first time, it's when Jesus recreates these actions of sacrifice. Sacrifice. Luke is telling us you don't understand Jesus, even when he's right in front of you, unless you see him in the context of his death, his sacrifice, and his resurrection. That's central. The crucifixion of Jesus, his loving sacrifice and submission on our behalf, is the lens through which we finally see Jesus for who he is. That's the key point. Now, I know, I'm a big fan. I've shared with you a lot about this man. Mr. Fred Rogers, right? Mr. Rogers, our childhood companion.
Yeah.
And I've shared with you a lot about him because if you return and you watch Mr. Rogers as an adult, he can be mind-numbingly boring if you watch him as an adult, right? He talks super slowly. He has very small words. His puppetry is, if you look at his puppetry, I think the word that it's conjured in my mind is primitive. Compared to like the computer-aided stuff that we see, it's just a man with a little puppet with changing his voice in 4 different voices, right? That's Mr. Rogers' puppets, right? Land of Make-Believe is mostly make-believe and not a lot of technology. But the magic of Mr. Rogers is this. When you watch him interact with children, like they'll bring children onto the set, or they'll follow him along and you'll see him like interact with kids on the street or in the factory or at playgrounds or in hospitals. He is amazing with children. Like all children. He's a magician with children. It does not matter what child that is, what age, what background, what level of maturity, what trauma they've been through, if they are a terrible, raging brat. Mr. Rogers knows exactly what to say to children. They listen to him. They're drawn to him. They love the man. He was asked to write a prologue, Mr. Rogers was, to a medical journal. I think it was a pediatrician journal. They thought, oh, Mr. Rogers, he can lend us some good advice in terms of talking to kids because we find them in our office every single day, right? He'll give us some deep behavioral advice as we deal with kids day in and day out. They probably foresaw that Fred Rogers would write a couple of pages, maybe a few paragraphs with some good concepts, pay attention to kids. But instead, in response to the request, 1 sentence. Mr. Rogers returns with 1 sentence that summed up everything about what he does in terms of having this magic interaction with children, dealing with them, loving them, welcoming them, doing everything with kids. 6 words. It breaks you. It breaks you. You were a child once too. Man, that's all he wrote. You were a child once too. Oh, those words echo through your mind as you watch Mr. Rogers from that point on in every interaction that he's ever had with a child, and you look at that man, everything opens up. You're like, dude, I understand everything about kids now, right? Everything that Mr. Rogers does is the magic that is Fred Rogers through this, right? How he displays patience, how he reaches the unreachable, how he shows love and understanding to every single child that comes into his presence, How he says just the right words to just the right kids because he remembers just what it's like to be them, to be a kid, thinking and feeling and experiencing just like, because he vividly understands how to remember how he was when he was a child, how to think and feel like that. You watch Mr. Rogers and you think, you were a child once too, and you understand just everything about everything that makes this man magical with kids. This passage is what it illustrates about Jesus. You want to know Jesus? You want to understand Jesus? Go to Easter. Jesus gave his life to love us, to forgive us, and to rescue us, and he comes back to life to show that he's still living, and he's communicating, and he's loving us today. Everything we know about Jesus, everything we want to learn about God himself, walking with us, this is our starting point. This is our ending point. This is the guiding truth. Easter is it. Our new life coming from the death and the resurrection of Christ. That is when we begin to understand and to see Jesus for who he is. When our eyes are opened to everything about him.